In today's installment of that marginally affects you that you never knew you should care about, welcome to the exciting world of broadcast audio loudness standards. Now, if you didn't know that there were standards, this video will cover some tricks you can use to give your content consistency and a more professional sheen, which we'll cover in depth later. So as usual, what the hell am I talking about and why this topic of all possible topics? Well, first, the why. If you're like most people, you've done your fair share of binging Netflix of late. I'm sure entire seasons have melted into each other just like those CBD gummies that you left out in the sun, and the ass groove in your couch is taking on more shape than a marble sculpture. Now, I don't know you, but I'm willing to make a prediction about you. I predict that nothing, I repeat, nothing annoys you more than when you're in the middle of a binge fest and that little screen pauses the video and asks you if you're still watching. Are you human? Are you? Now, why does this drive you into a state of pure, unadulterated rage? Because you actually have to move for a change. And the effort to get up and push that single button, like the skip intro button, feels like your own private Everest, a challenge that will just about break you. But there's something us lazy folk never have to do. How often do we have to change the volume when we're watching Netflix? When the next episode autoplays after the last one, does the volume change? I know you're thinking, of course not, stupid. And while I am stupid, hear me out, okay? The reason that you don't have to constantly turn your volume up and down on Netflix or broadcast TV is because of broadcast audio loudness standards. Ooh, I'm excited already. So clearly someone, not you of course, is being paid to care about how loud things are and has devised a way to keep things the same relative loudness despite all kinds of shit happening, like explosions and gunshots and music and whispering and screaming and all of that good stuff that distracts us from the turbulence of modern life. In this video, we cover what audio loudness standards are and why they matter, best practices for when you're making your own content, and the problems with no one knowing these standards or caring in an era where we're all content creators. You might say, the answer is simple. Let's just set a certain loudness standard target and use it for everything. Oh, you simple, naive fool. Just kidding. But seriously, we can't even agree on the color of a blue dress in a picture. So what chance is there that between Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, Netflix, podcast, TikTok, Triller, Ziller, ZipChat, SlapZip, Chimble, Grungle, Fleblob, Cleedle, and ChopClop, that we can all agree on implementing a single universal loudness standard across all media outlets? After all, that would be way too easy. With that, welcome to a whole new world you'll wish you never knew about, broadcast audio standards. And yes, this video will serve as a comprehensive guide for those of you who want to make more professional sounding content. So here we go. The first part of tonight's video, what are audio loudness standards and why do they matter? To begin with, you must understand, in a concept not at all related to George Lucas, thank God, the Loudness Wars. Now, I won't deep dive into the complicated history of audio loudness, but I'll do a summary of a summary of a summary here to save us both time. As far back as the jukebox days, it became clear that if a single was louder than all the rest, it would stand out, grab people's attention more, be played more, and therefore earn more money for the creator. It's not hard to imagine. You've been sipping Singapore slings in the Pogo Lounge, chatting away over the background music, when suddenly the background music turns into the frontground music. Foreground music? Ooh, what is that hot, hot new hotness, you exclaim, spitting up your booze? And more importantly, where can I buy that record right now? Essentially, ever since records were recorded and competed for your attention and dollars, mixers and artists and record labels have been engaged in a constant battle of one-upsmanship. This led to the Loudness Wars, which by all accounts came to a head in the late 90s, just in time for the rise of Napster and crappy-sounding MP3s. In fact, some of the loudest, most mangled, and most generally terribly mixed music ever made in human history came about in the late 90s, early 2000s. And many of these records had to be remixed later just to be listenable. So take that, timeless Ella Fitzgerald. You may or may not know this, but there is a hard limit on a digital file in terms of how loud it can go. 0 dB. Think of 0 dB as the ceiling on a digital recording. No song can go higher than 0, but you can distort and compress the ever-loving hell of it a sound to basically make the whole thing sit near 0 dB, making it much louder than a recording with only occasional peaks near 0 dB. And so the idea was born that loudness isn't about how loud something is temporarily, but rather how loud something is on average. Are you with me so far? Good, because I'm already bored. But I promise, magic is coming if you just, for the love of God, just keep watching this video till the end. Huh? You gonna do that for me? Even a gently mixed symphonic piece might have the odd timpani hit touching the 0 dB ceiling, but the rest of it would be much softer, creating both pleasing musical dynamics and a much lower average loudness. To determine the average loudness, clever calculations have to be run spanning the entire length of whatever piece of audio you're measuring, whether that's a song or a TV show, a YouTube video or a film or whatever. Audiophiles have long loved their hipster vinyl players, expensive gold-plated wires, and dynamic range, poo-pooing digital formats altogether in favor of classic analog goodness. But modern mix engineers are a more practical bunch. They understand that digital formats are here to stay and that we have to make the most of them. So rather than giving up on digital audio altogether, like your favorite Silver Lake barista did, they tried to find ways of working with the medium. Remember in the beginning of this video when I said that you take for granted that someone out there at Netflix cares about audio standards? Well, what if I told you that approaching 2000 and up, until as recently as 2011, no one even had a standard, and in the late 90s, the experts were working day and night to actively ruin recorded music as we know it, trying to get louder, 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 louder! And that was just in music. You know who else has historically been very interested in screaming at you louder to get your attention constantly? Advertisers, of course, the world's most lovable people right after lawyers and Carol Baskin. Those of you born prior to the TikTok generation will recall that after the 80s, television commercials got steadily louder and louder and louder relative to the programs people were watching. And I can confirm, I distinctly remember having to get up and turn down the volume or mute the TV during commercials because they were so obviously, obnoxiously much louder than The Simpsons. And I'm not the only one who noticed. An article from audio equipment company TC Electronics says, music recordings from the past often appear to be significantly softer than modern pop and rock recordings, and in a television context, promos and commercials are generally much louder than e.g. film, drama, or newscast. No wonder that it's always the volume buttons on remote controls that get worn out the first. Fascinating stuff. And people started complaining all over the world about this phenomenon, as you can read in articles like this. And as with all things that advertisers and marketers do to demand your attention constantly, they eventually pushed commercial loudness too far, and Jane Q. Public wrote a series of angry letters. Prior methods of determining loudness were easily fooled, and you could just highly compress, jam through horrible sounding material, and it could just get right on by. So clearly something needed to be done. It was only in 2011 that the BS.1770 loudness standard was conceived. It then went through multiple revisions, ending up at the final and/or current revision in 2015, available here in all of its mind-numbing glory. Fun fact, the BS in BS.1770 stands for bull. Just kidding. It's probably broadcasting service or broadcast standards or some other bull. Finally, someone was going to level the playing field, eliminate obnoxious commercials once and for all, and give us standards to stop people from one-upping each other in terms of loudness, and instead focus on, I don't know, sonic quality, maybe? Which brings me to the second part of tonight's video. How can you create content in conformance with the standard, giving you a more professional sonic sheen? For comparison, a less professional sheen would be Charlie, but that reference is as dated as Napster itself. And I'm sorry I have failed you. To start with, you need to know what exactly we're using to measure our audio loudness. Before we can even begin to make any meaningful decisions, enter LKFS or LUFS. LKFS, short for loudness, K-weighted relative to full scale, is the method developed for measuring programmatic loudness over time in accordance with the 2011 BS.1770 loudness standard. You can read all about it on Wikipedia right here. It's a standard loudness measurement unit used for audio normalization in broadcast television systems and other video and music streaming services. So obviously, to start making your audio comply with this standard, you need a way to measure it first. There are many such tools like Insight from Isotope or the Waves WLM Plus loudness meter plugin, my personal favorite because it has all the presets for the various standards built right in, or even this free program that you can download right now, the Orban loudness meter, among many, many others these days. Armed with the ability to measure your loudness, now you can adjust this volume, compression, EQ, and all of that of the dialogue in your DAW of choice to conform it to that standard. Because when we're talking about loudness for television, podcasts, Netflix, and YouTube, we are talking about dialogue here. Now, why do we use dialogue and not music to determine loudness, you might ask, catching on ever so slightly to the importance of this boring as shit standard? Great observation. Well, as humans, we're obviously most sensitive to the human voice. Whether it's TV, radio, podcast, social media, or anything, our brain instinctively latches on to the voice above all. And indeed, when watching content, it's really the level of the dialogue that will make us reach for the remote and leave our blissful Cheeto couch-locked coma. After all, it was the overly loud dialogue of commercials that had people running to the phones to complain to their TV providers, leading to the passing of the CALM Act in 2010, or the Commercial Advertisement Loudness Mitigation Act, and the whole BS.1770 standard in the first place, as you can read on the fcc.gov website right here. And you can also read it in that other article that I posted where people were saying, hey, isn't it time that we built some kind of standard to address all of this nonsense? So essentially, as people who produce non-musical content like this, all of our loudness decisions start with the dialogue by itself, ignoring music, sound effects, and everything else. To get our work in the ballpark, we just need to solo a single piece of dialogue, like me talking to you right now, throw on our trusty LKFS or LUFS meter on the master bus of our DAW of choice, and get to work. The beauty of LKFS as a measurement tool is that 1 unit of LKFS is 1 dB. So bringing a program up from -24 to -16 is as simple as raising the volume by 8 dB. Be advised, however, that you'll need to engage compressors or limiters to make sure that when you raise or lower the volume that your peaks are not above -2 or -1 dB, and God forbid they're not going above the 0 dB threshold, which will cause distortion all over the place. Here's a handy table that you can reference to comply with the LKFS standards for various platforms, effective today. So are you seeing the huge issue here where your podcast will be at -16 LUFS and Netflix at -27 is a full 9 dB quieter? And have you noticed how both broadcast TV like Stephen Colbert, Jimmy Kimmel, etc., and podcasts exist simultaneously on platforms like YouTube? This means that any given YouTube video, even if they're following a standard somewhere, could end up being 9 dB or more apart in terms of loudness, which would certainly have you reaching for the volume knob if you switched from, say, Joe Rogan to Conan O'Brien. What should you do when making content with all of these different number targets? The simple answer is to make different volumes for different types of material and rigorously comply with the standard in all of its various forms. This would mean that you make your podcast -16 for Apple, make your videos -24, -23, depending on if you live in America or Europe, and so on. And then you're gravy, right? Seems fairly basic, but wait. What if you post both of these types of content on your own YouTube or Instagram? Your post will be a full 8 dB apart, say your podcast and a video. Bye-bye consistency that we're working so hard to achieve. Damn it, there is no God. Why have you forsaken us yet again? Who the hell invented this crazy standard anyways, and why is the rest of the world versus America still a thing here like everywhere else? Which brings me to the final piece of our video. The problems with no one knowing these standards or caring in an era where we're all content creators. Remember how the whole thing that started us on the Loudness Wars was people competing for our attention by making music and dialogue louder and louder? Well, what happens when you have an entire generation of TikTok, YouTube creators making content who've never even heard of a loudness standard, let alone ways to comply with one? Well, in short, here we go again. I've checked. And popular YouTubers like Casey Neistat, often around -18 LUFS, and Marcus Brownlee, often around -16 LKFS, are making their content loud, loud, loud. 10 dB louder than the Netflix standard that you're watching on your same computer. After all, they want kids on iPads to be able to deafen their parents' ears from across the room, as I can attest. Because yet again, louder equals better, right? Right? So The Late Show is at a healthy -24, while TikTokers are distorting things as loud as possible to get and keep your attention. One of the main reasons why platforms like Instagram and YouTube are the Wild West is because they don't have the consistency that platforms like Netflix insist on. After all, Netflix has procedures for vetting content, and that content is made entirely by professionals, where most social media has no such professionalism. So what's my solution to all of this crazy nonsense? Well, it's kind of twofold, honestly. We need more widespread education about the audio standards to help content creators make better and more consistent content. All social platforms should have ways of checking your levels as and before you post. That's my opinion. And that's why I made this video, to educate people about this thing that affects us all. Part of solving this problem is you committing to adhering to an audio standard for your own content, because you're a person who wants to constantly improve. It will make your content more consistent, more professional, and will give you, in my opinion, a subconscious edge over lazier, less knowledgeable content creators. Or two, these platforms can normalize audio to make sure that all content, regardless of how it's uploaded, meets the same criteria by adjusting the volume dynamically. But a lot of audio professionals do not like this. Why don't we like things like platforms changing our volume on us? Because it modifies and degrades the sound that audio professionals have worked so hard to achieve in their fancy schmancy big studios. For the average creator who doesn't care, this doesn't matter too much. But for audio geeks, you don't want someone messing with your mix, man. So the takeaway: if you commit to matching John Oliver, as I have, can you tell that I'm obsessed? He'll be at least 8 dB quieter than Marcus Brownlee on the same YouTube platform. And of course, if you're mixing content for radio, TV, Netflix, or Apple Podcasts, you have to meet the audio standards set forth in the table earlier, or your content will be rejected. Full stop. However, you're probably not going to be on broadcast TV or Netflix anytime soon, so why match a standard for something that your content will never be on? On the other hand, if your content is too loud, it'll distort phone speakers, making it a experience for phone viewers for Instagram and so on. Because you don't want to be that annoyingly loud commercial that sends people running when your content is watched between two professionally made videos. So despite all of these competing standards, why not let's just set a middle ground target, not officially advised by any of the official standards of, say, -20 LKFS? This will make your content louder than broadcast TV, quieter than podcasts, but not too far away from either of them as to be horrible. Like the Buddha, we can find a middle way. You can set all of your non-podcast content to this level, and you'll probably generally be fine, or you can set all of your content to -16 like Marcus Brownlee did. Since podcasts have to be at -16, you won't have a choice there, but for the rest of it, you do. For the rest of your content, just set a standard for yourself and make sure that all of your conforms to it. And there you have it, an entire video about something that you never knew you should care about, but now, hopefully, you're considering caring about it 1% more. Ah, the internet. Is there anything you can't do?